Tonight, Israeli settlers lit up Palestinian homes and cars in what is being described as the worst settler rampage in years. Palestinians allege support from Israeli forces, and Ontario's rural communities opting for work-life balance. Algonquin Highlands is the latest addition to the small town municipalities to try 4-day work week. Experts call this a necessary step to keep up with the needs of the staff. Recapping Black History Month with a former school teacher. She explains the challenges facing Black Muslim educators.
Canadians did have to, in a sense, fight their own battles to, get Black History Month established. So for us, it's basically just about making sure that people are aware of the struggle and our, fight for freedom, and what that personally means to us, and the ongoing, anti-Black racism movement that we encourage.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. This is Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. I am Catherine Bullock. Israeli settlers are carrying out what is described as a pogrom in Palestinian villages in the West Bank. The settlers have so far carried out at least 300 attacks, burning down at least 30 homes and dozens of cars. The rampage started a day after a Palestinian killed 2 settlers. There are reports of Palestinians attacked with rods and stones. According to the victims, the settlers were protected by the Israeli army. The Israeli army closed the entrance to Nablus today and employed hundreds of more soldiers in the area. Dozens of armed settlers gathered, raising fears of another attack. Ontario's small-town municipalities are converting to a 4-day work week to provide work-life balance to employees. Algonquin Highlands is the latest small-town municipality to be adopting the change. The 4-day work week will be effective March in the town. Previously, the townships of Aylmer, Zora, and French River have made the move to attract and retain workers. The town's mayor says flexible working arrangements are necessary to cater to the needs of staff. Research data released in the UK last week shows more than 60 companies that contributed to the 4-day work week trial will adopt it permanently. A shipwreck off Calabria, Italy has left 62 migrants dead. The overloaded wooden boat broke up and sank early Sunday in stormy seas off Italy's southern coast. Save the Children charity said on Twitter it was supporting survivors from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Syria, including 10 miners who had been traveling with their families from Turkey. The disaster has further fueled the debate in Italy over search and rescue measures for saving migrants. Italy's far-right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has pledged to curb migrant arrivals. Her government pushed through a controversial law last week that forces migrant aid charities to perform only one life-saving rescue mission at a time before heading directly to ports. The first G20 finance ministers meeting in India ended Saturday with a difference of opinions about the Ukraine war. India had to release a chair summary and outcome document instead of a joint statement after the meeting in Bengaluru. Most member countries strongly deplored the aggression by Russia against Ukraine and demanded a complete and unconditional withdrawal. According to the summary, those conditions were not agreed to by Russia and China. They also stressed that the war is causing immense human suffering and exacerbating existing fragilities in the global economy. In a G20 summit held in Indonesia last year, there were similar differences regarding the war. Black History Month, recognized every year in February, is almost over. The theme this year is Ours to Tell. To find out how Black Canadian Muslims celebrate Black History Month, we are joined by a co-founder and board member of Black Canadian Muslims, Malika Harris. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. When I first came to Canada, I met Africans, both Muslim and non-Muslim, who didn't think of themselves as Black and wouldn't necessarily be excited, let's say, about a Black History Month. So I'm wondering if you could explain what the month means to Black Canadian Muslims.
Yes, I think most of us know that Black History Month is something that originated from the US. And it probably took a little bit more time for um, Black Canadians in general, as well as Black Muslims, to kind of affiliate themselves with the heritage and the pride that basically brought about the notion or the idea of Black History Month. Canadians did have to, in a sense, fight their own battles
Mm.
to, get Black History Month established. So for us, it's basically just about making sure that people are aware of the struggle and our, fight for freedom, and what that personally means to us, and the ongoing, anti-Black racism movement that we encourage.
I don't want to take this topic too far sideways because we want to talk about Black History Month, but are you able to shed light on why a Black Muslim from Africa might not call himself or herself Black? Like, what does that mean?
Well, the reality is, if you think about people coming from the continent, when I say continent, I'm referring to Africa, they are surrounded by Black people. They are immersed in Black culture, and they understand that there are individual, differences and nuances in their different cultures, depending on which country in Africa we're referring to. So there was no real need for them to identify themselves as Black. Because of the fact that they have their whole cultures and their whole heritages, and they don't necessarily need to distinguish themselves from another group, on that continent. Whereas for those of us here in North America, in Europe and in the Western countries, a lot of times we're a minority. So as a result of being a minority and the manner in which we were brought to these lands, pretty much puts us in a unique position where there was a point in time, during the civil rights movement, where we had to declare ourselves as Black and be proud of it, because of the fact that Black was looked down upon. So we decided to claim it and be proud that we're Black, and suggest that that doesn't have a negative connotation.
So when Muslims celebrate Black History Month, how do you think they're doing?
Um, when you say how do you think they're doing?
Well, you used to be a teacher, so an A, a B, or a C. Like,
Mhm.
what's the grade for how Muslims celebrate or recognize Black History Month?
Oh, our larger Muslim community.
Mm.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So if we're referring to our larger Muslim community, for me, I have, I can only draw on my personal experiences, in terms of our, the years that I've been in the community, as well as the fact that specifically teaching in Islamic schools for over, 16 years. And I can say that, there were maybe one of the schools, I taught at 4 different schools, maybe one of the schools had, what would I say, put in quite a bit of effort to ensure that students really were immersed in some of the history that related to Black Canadians in general, and then, of course, Black Muslims. So, the majority of the schools don't recognize it as something that has a connection to them. So I think in our Muslim community in general, it's this mentality somehow that, the Black that they're referring to is some outside source. It doesn't really, it's a non-Muslim thing. It doesn't really have anything to do with Muslims. We have seen since, the incident with George Floyd, that people have made more of an effort to start talking about racism, talking about, Black history, and Black pride and these types of things, and actually calling Black people to come, Black Muslims in particular, to come into their spaces and to share with them. Because I think that was initially the issue, that even when it was talked about, people who were non-Black were trying to, divulge the information, and they were kind of excluding us from that conversation. So, alhamdulillah, the good thing now is that we're noticing that, we're being included more because of the awareness in our general society.
So there's quite a lot in what you said. I have two follow-up questions. I hope that we'll be able to get them in. Let's
Mhm.
talk about the first part of what you were saying, that a lot of the Islamic schools just weren't recognizing it. And I suppose you're talking about like the non-Black immigrant Muslims who uh, I think you said that Black history is about non-Muslims or something else.
Mhm.
Black Muslims in Canada must feel their identities erased. They use that word, erased. Is that what it means? It feels like?
Yeah, because I think what's interesting to me is how, a lot of the immigrants who are in the Muslim community now, especially the newer immigrants, are gaining so much from the struggle that Black people before them, people of African descent before them fought against racism, fought against inequality, and basically, changed some laws that if they had come to this country previously, back in the 1960s, even early 70s, they would have seen a very different Canada, right? In which there was a lot more exclusion of Black people. And so they don't sometimes realize, and I think it's all about education. It's not, that someone just deliberately comes and, sort of decides that, Black people have no value. It's really about the fact that they're not being educated to understand that a lot of the rights that they have today are the result of, African Americans, African Canadians fighting that good fight.
I know that there's some scholarship establishing that Muslims have been in Canada for over 400 years, having come out from West Africa in the slave trade. Is that the kind of history that you're talking about that people need to understand more?
Yes, I think so, because the reality is that there are stereotypes of Black people, and for some reason, the history is not making it into people's thought process or the way that they process and view Black people. However, the stereotypes are right, because of Hollywood, because of just media and the way that we're presented. So it's very interesting. Personally, I discovered when teaching in Islamic schools, they had many of the students who were new immigrants had very concise ideas about Black people. Unfortunately, those ideas were, for the most part, negative, and related to something around crime or danger or these types of things. I've had students in my own class address this issue with me, looking at me as a Black teacher and still saying to me something about, Black people being dangerous or criminals or that type of thing. So it's interesting to me that they managed to find out that information even in their countries before they came here. But when they come here, it takes them quite some time to understand what Black people really went through as to why our condition is the way that it is. And that instead of looking at us with empathy, and looking at us in a sense as a resilient people who have managed to survive so much, they're looking at us as people who will harm them in some way, right? And that somehow we're lesser in society. So I think this is the kind of thing that we're really talking about.
That's really unfortunate. How sad that you've told that story, but I'm glad that you're able to tell that story. I want to pick up on something you said earlier about a newer immigrant arriving and having rights that have come from a prior struggle by African Canadians that they might not have enjoyed if that struggle hadn't happened. Are you able to give an example of what that might be?
Yeah, I think, if we go back to the 1960s, especially with America, Canada tends to be a little bit more silent in a sense. However, much of the same racism was going on here, right? I have parents who grew up here in that time, who can testify to the fact that, even though the signs may not have been as big as the signs that you find in America, that were clearly like white only restaurant or white only fountains or those types of things, there was an unspoken type of racism, a more silent racism that existed in Canada, where Black people knew you were not welcome here, and that people wouldn't rent property to them. Many times they would spend a lot of their time looking for a place to rent. Of course, banks wouldn't approve them to purchase a place. So many times, these types of things impacted Black people a lot, and the whole notion that Black people were the other and they shouldn't be here. So what a lot of our new immigrants, especially in the Muslim community, need to understand: you're being welcomed on a large part because of the work that many African Americans, African Canadians have done around equity, right? And around the whole notion of treating people in a dignified manner despite their culture.
There's a lot in what you're saying. We're out of time, but hopefully we can have you or someone else from your organization on the show to unpack this a little more. Thanks for joining us.
Jazakallah for having me. I really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.